Welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks, How to Get It Just Right. Thank you so much for joining us for another conversation on the importance of finding centeredness and making an impact from that point of centeredness. Today's conversation is going to be about the importance of emotional intelligence, how emotional intelligence helps us ground to be mindful professionals, mindful citizens of a society, and how do we raise the next generation of youth to be mindful and grounded in the knowing of emotional intelligence to then build a more harmonious society. And to have this conversation with me today is Thomas Aagesen, and we call him TJ. But TJ, welcome to Unleash Your Inner Goldilocks. It's super excited to have you here.
I'm happy to be here, Cass. Thanks for making the time for me on this.
My pleasure. So TJ I met him when he was a student at the Southern Illinois University, and he has been in the fire department, making a huge impact in public safety. And today he runs his own business and consulting for communities and organizations on how to keep public safety viable. But he and I also have the honor and pleasure of being on the board of a not-for-profit called Equip Kids. So we'll be touching base on all of that. Why don't you take a moment, TJ, and talk about what got you into embracing emotional intelligence and how that has enhanced your career and your impact in the world?
So when I first got into the fire service, like the attitude towards kind of mental health and mental emergencies and even just simple things like autism was completely different from where we are today. And through a lot of training within the fire department and emergency services, we all learned a lot about emotional intelligence and managing care for patients in different aspects, and just simple things like dealing with addiction. With the opioid crisis, our mentality just 10 years ago was that we needed to give tons of meds to bring people out of their addiction. And then in the process of doing so, many doctors realized that that was incredibly traumatic for the actual user of the opiates system, and was causing them things like terrors and all these other issues. So through things like emotional intelligence, we've learned to adapt and kind of empathize with this different circumstances. And I've used those tools in many other aspects of my life. So I have a nephew who's special needs, and he's on the autism spectrum. And anything and everything I've learned at work, I've been able to bring back and use and help him. So it's been great.
That is powerful, right? Emotional intelligence is something that helps us at work, helps us at home. And research shows that 80% of a human's success is directly correlated to their emotional quotient. And only 20% is to their IQ and the skill. Because we are, as creatures, we're social. We provide our services in a social community, and we engage with humans, so that human interaction becomes critical. So when you talk about bringing that emotional intelligence to help your nephew, that's a good segue for us to talk about how do you see us through the work we're doing at Equip Kids and through the work you and I do individually and together as an extended fire community. What do we do, and how are you seeing we can help the young people of today? Because the world today is different, right? They're growing up in a different world than we did.
Yeah, I think is part of the big thing. Is I think before you start coming up with solutions, it's best to define the problem and really have a firm understanding on what that looks like. And I don't think you have to go too far to understand things like gun violence in school settings, and understand things like social media and bullying and what the effects that has on things like the teen suicide rate and teen addiction rates. So I think when we start to boil these things down, there's a common ground that's kind of among all of them, and emotional intelligence is the thing that kind of bridges that gap and can help. It's not going to solve everything, but it's definitely going to make the situation a lot more palatable and easier for people to, figure a way around these things. And if we can prevent just 10 or 20% of them, it's something, versus, not doing anything is not helping us. So
Absolutely. And I hear what you're saying, DJ, because emotional intelligence is about creating awareness, having empathy, and holding space for people. And therefore, we are going to be less triggering as a society. And we individually are going to be less often triggered too. So it truly kind of softens the landing for everybody so that it is not, kill or be killed kind of an environment that can tend to become at its extreme.
No, I understand that. Yeah. It's I think, growing up, there are aspects in everybody's life that they point back to and we're like, when I was in middle school or I was in high school, those are the worst years of my life, and I just feel like when we were growing up, when you left school, you were gone from school. But I think kids today, like because of social media, the internet, cell phones, it doesn't stop for them. So they're constantly surrounded with that community. So I can kind of understand from their perspective how it becomes so all encompassing. And it feels like, even though we all know it to be a temporary state, it feels like just a permanent state for them because there's no way out and they have no outlet. So I feel horrible for kids today. It's a very rough situation. So,
And they've also grown up with devices and technology and less human time. So their human connections have been less throughout their growing up years. And let's
yeah,
face it, parents are working long hours, sometimes working 2, 3 jobs to make ends meet, and kids are constantly with devices, and social media is their connector.
I applaud my sister all the time. She's one of my favorite people in the world, but I really love what she did with her kids. And, she said, I'm not giving them devices until they need them for school. And, everybody's, wanting to put devices in kids' hands. They're easy to entertain your children with, but you just hit the nail on the head. Like the human interaction is a thing. And a lot of the issues that we as a developed society are struggling with, countries that don't have the access to the technology that we do not have the same issues.
Yeah.
So it's not, I'm not pointing the finger at one thing and saying it's that, but I can tell you that it's not helping the situation. So
Absolutely. And poetically, this is the Suicide Prevention Week. This is the Mental Health Week, and it is also the 9/11 week. And I have lived through 9/11 because we had our New York office in Twin Tower 2 and our entire data backup in Twin Tower 1 for the East Coast. And this is a very difficult week for us, a difficult time, because we lost 308 team members. And it was the same time I was teaching for Southern, and my students knew that I was going to be in New York, and they actually showed up at Aon saying, where is Dr. Henry? If she's in New York, let us know. We have to go rescue her. And I always have a soft spot for my fire students because they are that caring and that giving. And yet so many perished as they ran to take care of people who were in trouble. Any thoughts, any message you want to share with the world? Because we forget after a crisis, 2, 3 years later, it's forgotten. People forget the sacrifices made. The people who went in to save still are suffering with illnesses as a result. So from a fireman's perspective, fire department perspective, any message, any word to society in terms of how we can change the way we look at things and the way we support our first responders?
I think just being able to understand that your first responders are doing the best that they can. And when you want to be critical of them in, your moment of need, you have to understand that if you're dealing with things like a hurricane or a tornado and you're disappointed in the response you're getting or something along those lines, you have to take into account that like there's 1,000 other people and there's only so many of us, and we're just always doing the best that we can, and we're here for you. But it's just a matter of making sure the resources are available. So the number one thing I'd say is like everybody talks about never forget, and like just trying to get away from the fact that you just post a picture on social media of the Twin Towers falling and figure out a way to thank someone in public service, whether it's a police officer or a firefighter or whatever. It goes a long way. I mean, any one of those guys could be having the worst day of their career. You don't know what they saw before you ran into them. So that's the biggest thing I'd throw.
And the other thing I want to add is when you're in a hurricane, when you're in a tornado, when you're in a natural disaster, remember your first responders are also in it. They're coming to rescue you while they know there's maybe nobody to rescue their own families, right? This is reality. And when somebody is truly willing to run into a disaster, when the human tendency is to run out, don't find fault with the people who are actually doing everything they can by doing things that are counterintuitive in terms of survival.
The one thing I find interesting, I was in Iceland just before the pandemic, 2019 to 2020. And, I sometimes like to take in the broader perspective of different nations when I'm there. Culturally, everybody's just a little bit different. But one of the things that Iceland does that I thought was unique was, there was a big blizzard coming the one day we were there, and they shut every road down. And it was a big deal. And we had a couple of excursions planned for the day, and all of our outfitters called and said, everything's canceled. All the roads are closed. And I'm like, wow, this just doesn't happen here. And we get snowstorms all the time. And they're like, no, you don't understand. If you're caught on the road and you're stuck and the emergency services have to come out to get you, it's a $3,500 fine. And I'm like, oh, and they're like, yeah, they told you not to go out. You went out. You're not a victim. That was a decision. This is the cost of that decision. And I'm like, we do not practice that. That is everybody's a victim, regardless of, your decision-making process in the situation.
And that truly is publicly responsible, right?
Yeah.
It's public funding. Then we can't complain about public funds not being used right if we are the ones causing that misuse. And no, my hat's off to them.
Yeah, I just, there's certain procedures and policies they had when we were there that I fell in love with, that I thought were just really sensible and I'm like, oh, that's a reasonable thing. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I know, I just really enjoyed it. So
yeah. So in the same vein, I always look at states that don't have state taxes. They're normally southern states that are hurricane prone. But every year they want emergency relief, but they don't take taxes. But when the northern states that take taxes have a natural disaster like Sandy, the southern states won't approve funding. And so it's like you collectively make a decision. You don't need taxes because you don't need to maintain infrastructure. Then why do you come with a begging bowl to the other states? Because we've taken taxes. You complain that we are expensive, but we're expensive because we maintain our infrastructure. We don't go begging every time the infrastructure collapses. But we seem to have that culture here.
Yeah, we have a huge culture of in times of need, we just have this great generosity to help out. And for whatever reason, we'll do anything we can. Like in Katrina, I know we sent down countless pieces of fire equipment and personnel in waves down into Louisiana to help out for weeks at a time. And, I don't think there's a contingent in the South that could come to the North if we had a similar event.
Yeah, because they don't have state funding.
And they just operate on shoestring budgets. So they're in a lot of ways they're understaffed, and they're under-equipped to be able to provide their own services, let alone services to someone else.
So that too goes back to emotional intelligence, right? Collectively as communities, they'd rather save the tax money, but then be exposed to all of these risks. And if you take the same yardstick that Iceland has, those are conscious choices.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that Iceland did that was unique, they had a massive fire in the major city. There's only one major city, Reykjavik, in Iceland. So the city of Reykjavik had a massive fire in the early 1900s, right around when the Chicago fire happened. I don't remember the exact dates, but unlike Chicago, Iceland took on the stance of, we're not going to let this happen again. Everything is built out of concrete going forward. So they have some of those most stringent building codes in probably the world, because everything has to be earthquake rated and made of concrete. So their structures, number one, will not burn to the ground, and number two, will not collapse in the event of an earthquake. So it's just really progressive thinking in the act of like natural disasters and just trying to prepare for the next big emergency. So
we're living in a world of cost of doing business, and we try to cut corners, right? And as we start engaging as emotionally intelligent, socially responsible professionals, then we start taking best practices from different places. As we extend that thinking to public safety, and public safety is not just the people providing service, the public's propensity to be proactive in making sure that they are being safe. What one or two tips or guidance would you have for the public, whether it's businesses or residential communities, in terms of being responsible for our own public safety, not just expect somebody else to come and rescue us?
A lot of times I think, I understand businesses are trying to generate a profit, but I'll use just the smallest example that probably touches the most households, and there's the most people probably doing it is landlords. And when it comes to the simple things like smoke detectors and just the ability to understand the importance of them, and then like the current smoke detectors you can buy for a fraction of a cost of what you used to be able to, and they last for 10 years and they don't require any maintenance. And if you went through all of your apartments and had a maintenance schedule of putting these up every 10 years, it's not a huge financial commitment. It's not a huge time commitment, but it could make a huge difference in saving the lives of someone in your building. And it is incredibly disheartening when, I've seen it time and time again where detectors are either not present or not working. And in this day and age, in my opinion, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, that's intentionally choosing to stand in the middle of a highway when a car is coming at you, right? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, for a marginal cost, you can just avoid a ton of liability and a ton of heartache and loss for anybody that's going to get stuck in there. So it's very tragic.
So if people have any questions or want to reach out to you to get advice on public safety or any of the elements you have talked about, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you, TJ?
They can probably reach me on LinkedIn or that'd probably be the best way. So
okay. So what I will do is when I post this, I will put your LinkedIn locator so that they can reach out to you.
Great.
And as we close, I want to take a moment and honor our first responders, honor the family members that were lost, friends and coworkers who were lost in 9/11, as well as to suicide and mental health related issues. So let's take a moment and commit to making sure we show up mindfully. We make a commitment to continually evolve our own emotional intelligence and share what we are learning and what we are practicing with others in a way that we are continuing to build a more humane, empathetic society that truly is considerate of one another. Any closing thoughts you have, TJ?
Cass, I really appreciate you having me on. And I think, when we talk about emotional intelligence and we talk about 9/11, I look at like our country as a whole today and ask if that event were to happen today, given how divided we are, could we still come together in the same way? And I like to think that the emotional intelligence of the people in this country could move past their, in my opinion, petty differences and find common ground and embrace each other. And I just wish we could get back to that. I don't want any tragedy to bring us together. I just wish we could get back to that, because that was probably the most beautiful thing that came out of that, was the fact that we were able to come together for a common cause.
And you're right. We don't have to wait for a tragedy.
We don't.
Our democracy, our country, our national success, our nation's prosperity, all of that is good enough reason to come together. It's okay. We can all be a little bit of country or a little bit of rock and roll and still enjoy all the music, right? And to me, that is what it ultimately comes down to. So to our listeners out there, to the audience out there, as you're listening, our call to action today, TJ and me, and our Goldilocks community is, can we find a way, be different, embrace your uniqueness, but don't let that divide us. Because we have a common purpose, we have a common journey, that is to make an impact and make sure we as a nation, we as a human race, we as a human society thrive. And let's make sure we make it happen. Because ultimately, that's what Goldilocks is reminding us of. Not too hard, not too soft, not too hot, not too cold. How do we get it just right so that we can build a life in the future that behooves all of us?